"There's another fellow," muttered Scrooge, who overheard him. "My clerk, with 15 shillings a week and wife and family, take a boat. A Merry Christmas. I have retired to Bedlam." This lunatic, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had left 2 other people in. They were partly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands and bowed to him. "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe," said one of the gentlemen, referring to his list. "Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?" "Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years," Scrooge replied. "He died 7 years ago, this very night." "We have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner," said the gentleman, presenting his credentials. It certainly was, for they had been 2 kindred spirits. At the earnest word liberality, Scrooge frowned and shook his head, and handed the credentials back. "At the festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge," said the gentleman, taking up a pen, "it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and the destitute, who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessaries. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sire." "And there are no prisons?" asked Scrooge. "Plenty of prisons," said the gentleman, laying down the pen again. "And the union workhouses?" demanded Scrooge. "Are they still in operation?" "They are still," returned the gentleman. "I wish I could say they were not." "The treadmill and the poor lower in full vigor, then?" said Scrooge. "Oh, very busy, sire." "Oh, I was afraid from what you said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course," said Scrooge. "I am very glad to hear it." Under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body to multitude, returned the gentleman, "a few of us are endeavoring to raise funds to buy the poor some meat and drink and menstrual warmth. We choose this time because it is a time of all others, when want is nearly filled, and abundance rejoice. What shall I put you down for?" "Nothing," said Scrooge. "You wish to be anonymous?" "I wish to be left alone," said Scrooge. "Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I have mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there. Many can't go there, and many would rather die." "If they would rather die," said Scrooge, "they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Besides, excuse me, I don't know that. But you might know it, observed the gentleman. It's not my business, Scrooge returned. It's enough for a man to understand his own business and not to interfere with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue the point, the gentleman withdrew. Scrooge resumed his labors with an improved opinion of himself, and in a more fatuous temper than was usual with him. Meanwhile, the fog and darkness thickened so that people ran about with floating things, preferring their service to go before horses and carriage, and conduct them on the way. The ancient tower of the church, whose gruff old bell was always peeping slowly down at Scrooge out of a Gothic window in the wall, became invisible, and struck the hours and quarters and the clocks with tremendous vibrations afterwards, as if his teeth were chattering in his frozen head up there. The cold became intense, and the main street, at the corner of the court, some laborers were repairing their gas pipes, and had lighted a great fire in the blaze there, round which a party of ragged men and boys were gathered, warming their hands and winking their eyes before the blaze in rapture. The water flag being left in solitude, its overflowing sullenly congealed and turned to misanthropic eyes. The brightness of the shops were holly sprigs and berries cracked in the lamp heat of the windows, made the pale faces ruddy as they passed. Pastures and grocers' trees became a splendid joke, a glorious pageant, with which it was next to impossible to believe that such dull principles as Bergen and so had nothing to do. The Lord Mayor and the stronghold of the mighty mansion house gave orders to his 50 cooks and butlers to keep Christmas as the Lord Mayor's household should, and even the little teller, whom he had fined 5 shillings on the previous Monday for being drunk and bloodthirsty in the streets, stirred up tomorrow's pudding and his garret, while his lean wife and the baby selling out to buy the beef. Fucking yet colder, piercing, surging, biting and cold. If the good saint danced in, Albert nipped the evil spoon's nose with a touch of such weather as that, instead of using his familiar weapons. Then, indeed, he would have roared to lasting purpose. The honor of one's Count Janos, glowed and mumbled by the ugly court, as bombs are glowed by dogs, stooped down at Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol, but at the first sound of "God bless you, merry gentleman, may nothing you dismay," Scrooge seized the ruler with such energy of action that the singer fled in terror, leaving the keyhole to the fog and even more congenial frost. At length, the hour shutting up the counting house arrived. Within, ill-will Scrooge dismounted from his stool and testily admitted the fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed his candle out and put on his hat. "You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose," said Scrooge. "If quite convenient, sir." "It's not convenient," said Scrooge, "and it's not fair. If I was to stop half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used, I'd be bound." The clerk smiled faintly. "And yet," said Scrooge, "you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work." The clerk observed that it was only once a year. "A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December," said Scrooge, buttoning his greatcoat to the chin. "But I suppose you must have the whole day." "Be here all the earlier the next morning." The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, where he boasted no greatcoat, went down the slide on Calm Hill, at the end of a lane of boys 20 times, in honor of its being Christmas Eve, and then ran home to Camden Town, as hard as he could pelt, to play at Blind Man's Buff. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers, and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went off home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy sight of rooms, and the lowering part of building up your yard, with it had so little business to be, that one could scarcely help fancying it must have run there when it was a young house, playing at hide-and-seek with other houses, and forgotten the way out again. It was old enough now, and dreary enough, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge, the other rooms being all let out as offices. The yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was fain to grope with his hands. The fog and frost so hung about the black old gateway of the house that it seemed as if the genius of the weather sat in mouthful meditation on the threshold. Now, it is a fact that there is nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large. It is also a fact that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in that place. Also that Scrooge had as little of what is called fancy about him as any man in the city of London, even including, which is a bold word, the cooperation, alderman, and livery. Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon. And then let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face. It was not in impenetrable shadow as the other objects in the yard were, but had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley would look, with ghastly spectacles turned up on its ghastly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred, as if by breath of nut or hot air, and though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. That, and its livid color, made it horrible. But its horror seemed to be in spite of the face, and beyond its control, rather than a part of its own expression. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a terrible sensation to which it had been a stranger from infancy, would be untrue. But he put his hand upon the key he had relinquished, turned it steadily, walked in, and lighted his candle. He did pause, with a moment's irresolution before he shut the door, and he did look cautiously behind it first, as if he half expected to be terrified with the sight of Marley's pale tears tickling out into the hole. But there was nothing at the back of the door, except the screws and nuts that held the knocker on. So he said, "Pull, pull," and closed it with a bang.